In this video, we're going to be going over the firm's decision to produce. So basically, we're going to say when the firm is going to shut down or when they should continue to produce, just like the title of this video suggests. All right, so let's get to it. All right, so the firm's decision to produce. And so where we're going to start is the decision to whether to continue to produce or to shut down. And so to help us with this, there's a couple of guided practices here. There's two. So I just want you guys to pause the video, try to figure out yourselves, and then we'll go over it together. All right, so let's go over it. So the first one, total revenue. So we know total revenue, right? Total revenue is just price times quantity. And so we know that the firm is going to be producing 10 units. So that's going to be our quantity for this question. And this firm sells each one of them for $10 each, right? So our total revenue is just $10, right? The price that each one of these widgets are going to sell for, times the amount they're going to sell. So our total revenue, right, is going to be $100. Well, what about total cost, right? Well, total cost, remember, is just, we could say our total cost, right, is just our ATC times the quantity here. And so here, our total cost is, our quantity is still 10, right? Because they're still going to be producing 10, but our ATC is $15, right? So 10 times 15 gets us to 150. So our total cost is $150. Our variable cost, right? Our variable cost is just our AVC, our average variable cost, times the quantity. Well, our variable cost then is just 10, our quantity, times the average variable cost, which is $8, which gets us to $80 here. Well, now our fixed costs, right? So our fixed costs, we're going to have to do something slightly different. Well, we know the average fixed cost is the difference in our ATC and our AVC, right? So 15 minus 8 gets us 7, which gets to our average fixed cost here. Well, here, right, we could just do our fixed cost equals our average fixed cost times our quantity. So our fixed cost equals, right, the $7 times 10, which gets us to $70 here. Well, here, is this firm making a profit or a loss? Well, we know, right, profit or loss is just total revenue minus total cost. At this point, right, it's just 100 minus 150. So we're going to have a loss, so a negative $50 here. And so now the big question is, well, what should this firm do, right? This firm is making a loss. However, in the short run, should this firm continue to produce and stay open, or should they shut down? Right, and let me finish erasing everything real quick. Well, here, right, what we are going to say, right, and number 6 is going to be over here. What we are going to say is that the firm should continue to produce. So why should the firm continue to produce? Well, remember, let's look at our fixed costs, right? Our fixed cost is equal to $70. And then this firm is making a loss of $50. And so remember, fixed costs are costs that you always have to pay no matter how much you produce. So even if you shut down, you're still going to have to pay the rent on the building, right? You're still going to have to pay the utility bills. And so here, in the short run, right, this firm should continue to produce. Why? Because it's better to produce and lose $50 than shut down and lose 70, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Right? So if this firm just shut down, right, then here the firm would continuously pay that $70. However, if the firm just didn't shut down and continued to produce while taking that $50 loss, they're only losing $50 compared to the $70 they would have otherwise lost here. So because of that, right, they should continue to produce in the short run. Right? In the long run, if this firm continuously makes loss after loss after loss, then yes, of course, this firm should shut down, right? In the long run. But in the short run, right here and now, right, just with a snapshot in time, this firm should stay open and continue to produce here. All right, so what about this one? We're not going to go over the math. We're just going to get to the right answers here. So total revenue is 160. Total cost is 300. Our variable cost is 200. Our fixed cost is 100. I'll just put it over here. We have a loss of 160. So minus 160. And so now, in the short run, should this firm continue to produce or shut down? Well, here we are going to say this firm should shut down. Well, why? Well, here, right, our fixed costs are $100, and then our loss is a negative 160. So here, even if this firm continued to produce, right, this firm would still incur $160 worth of loss. However, if this firm shut down, they would only be losing $100 here. So it's in this firm's best interest to actually shut down because if they continue to produce, they will be losing an extra $60 here, right, compared to just losing their fixed cost of doing business. All right, so this brings us to, well, the shutdown rule, right? So when exactly should a firm shut down, right? In the two guided practice examples we talked about, well, a firm should shut down if their loss is greater than their fixed costs. Well, there's a simpler thing. What we are going to say is that a firm should continue to produce as long as the price is above the AVC. And so we haven't necessarily gotten to this point yet, but our price is the same thing as our marginal revenue curve, right? It's going to be perfectly horizontal. And then our AVC, right? And then we have our marginal cost, right? So the firm's going to produce here. Well, here, if the price is above the AVC, right? If the price is above the AVC, right, the firm should continue to produce. However, right, the flip side of that is if the AVC is above our price, if the entire AVC curve is above our marginal revenue curve, then the firm should shut down. And that's what that second bullet point is saying. When the price falls below the AVC, then the firm should minimize its losses by shutting down here. And why? Well, here, if the price is below the AVC, that means the firm has a loss that is bigger than their first cost. In other words, if our average variable cost, and let's draw this graph out, we'll draw it in purple, right? So we have our marginal revenue, which equals price, we have our marginal costs, and our AVC is completely above our price. So if the graph looks like that, the firm should shut down. It's just like in our past couple examples, right? Because here, the firm is losing more money by continuing to stay open rather than just paying their fixed costs here. And so this is just basically saying what we worked out mathematically in our past couple slides here. And so what we have to look out for when we're looking at the shutdown point is the minimum of the AVC. Let's do this in a better color so you guys can see it here. The minimum of the AVC is the shutdown point, meaning if the price is below the minimum of the AVC, the firm should stay open and continue to produce even though they're incurring a loss. If the AVC is above the price, in other words, if the price is below our AVC, the firm should shut down because the firm, right, is not making enough money to cover all their variable resources and are just going to lose more money by continuing to stay open there. And so that leads us to a separate concept altogether, right? But our supply curve. Remember I told you guys earlier in the year, basically any single graph you look at in micro is essentially a supply and demand graph. Well, the problem for us with our cost curves, right, is that there isn't necessarily a supply curve labeled. Well, even though there isn't a supply curve labeled, there is still a supply curve out there, right? And so what our supply curve is just the average variable cost above the marginal cost, right? And as you see here, right, this portion of the marginal cost curve is going to be our supply curve. In other words, once the marginal cost is above the AVC, that portion of the marginal cost curve acts as our supply curve. Well, why? Well, the next two bullet points are the examples here. Well, what happens to our supply curve or our marginal cost curve if variable cost increases due to a per unit tax? Well, we know in our thing, in unit 2, we said our supply would actually decrease there, right? Because we're enacting a tax. Well, here, our marginal costs are going to increase, right? The cost of producing these goods are going to increase because of the per unit tax, so our supply is going to decrease. So it acts just like a supply curve would. Well, what happens to the supply curve if the variable cost decreases due to a per unit subsidy? Well, a subsidy, right, is going to increase supply. Well, here, once we have a subsidy, the marginal cost is going to decrease, right? Which means, right, the cost of producing these goods are also going to decrease, which inevitably leads to an increase in supply. right? So what I'm trying to say here is that the marginal cost above the AVC, right? So this portion of the marginal cost curve acts as our supply curve, right? When our supply shifts to the left, right, or decreases, our marginal cost is going to increase, meaning it moves up, but really it moves left, which acts like our supply curve in that scenario. Just like if there's a per unit subsidy, right, our supply is going to increase, right? Our actual supply curve is going to increase. And so our marginal cost curve is going to go down, or really it's going to look like it's shifting to the right, which is basically what the supply curve would do in that scenario. And so this is just something that you guys have to keep your mind in. A per unit, this is the most important word right here, a per unit. Meaning, if there is a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy, it is a tax or subsidy that impacts the variable cost and impacts every single unit that is produced. It doesn't matter if it's 1 or 50, the 50th unit is going to be taxed just like the first unit produced is also going to be taxed here. And so if there's a per unit tax or subsidy, this is going to impact our quantity produced, so our marginal curve, our marginal cost curve is going to shift, as well as our average variable and our average total. So we said the profit maximizing spot is where MR equals MC. So if there is a change, if there is a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy implemented, right, our marginal cost is going to change, right, either up or down. So that is going to impact, right, where it intersects the marginal revenue curve, which impacts, right, our profit maximizing spot. However, if there is a lump sum tax or subsidy, meaning it's a one-time tax or a one-time subsidy, right, that they're not being taxed or given money based on each good they're producing, they're saying no matter how much you produce, you're going to be taxed this much, right? This only affects fixed costs. So a per unit affects variable costs, so it impacts our marginal cost, average variable, and average total cost curves. A lump sum tax or a lump sum subsidy only impacts our fixed costs. So our average fixed and our average total costs are the only things that are going to shift. And so our marginal cost curve stays the same. And so because our marginal cost curve stays the same, the quantity produced is not going to is going to stay the same. So that profit maximizing spot where MR equals MC is not going to change at all. And so yet again, to clean it up a little bit, a change in fixed costs changes our average total and our average fixed, but not our marginal cost curve, right? Which means, right, that a profit maximizing spot is going to stay the same. While a change in variable costs, meaning there's a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy, is going to change our average total, average variable, and our marginal cost. And because our marginal cost curve is also impacted by a change in variable cost, meaning a per unit tax or per unit subsidy, right, that our profit maximizing spot where MR equals MC is also going to change. And so the last thing I want to go over with you guys is entering and exiting in the long run. Basically, it's this idea of barriers to entry. All barriers to entry is just factors that prevent new firms from entering into a given market, right? So if we're looking at a monopoly, right, barriers to entry in a monopoly market is very high because one firm controls a vast portion of the industry. And so markets with low barriers, right, have more competition and individual firms make less profit, which makes sense, right? If there are very low barriers to entry, anyone can join and sell stuff, which means each individual firm is going to be making less profit. However, a market with high barriers have less competition, and so individual firms make more profit, right? Which yet again should make sense, right? If not a lot of companies are competing against each other because of high barriers to entry, each individual firm is going to make more money because there's less competition. And so yet again, right, we talked about this idea of a normal profit in a past video. And so what we are going to say is that in an efficient market, firms that have identical products will make a normal profit. In other words, right, in an extremely efficient profit, all firms are going to break even, right? They're going to be making no economic profit, which doesn't mean they aren't making profit altogether. Remember, economic profit means we're taking into account our opportunity cost, the implicit cost of doing business, what you're giving up to be producing that good, right? So a normal profit is a good thing, right? In reality, if you're looking at the ledger, looking at accounting profit, you're still making profit. It's just in economic terms, you're breaking even. You're not making any profit whatsoever. So in a perfectly efficient market, all firms are going to be making a normal profit. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. Peace.